The rats were already dead. That was the first sign. Not a cough, not a fever. Dead rats, dozens of them, lying in the streets of a European city in the autumn of 1347. And the people who stepped over them on their way to market did not run. They did not quarantine. They did not do any of the things that might have saved them. They stepped over the rats and kept walking. Because in 1348, a dead rat in the street was not a warning. It was Tuesday. Within 6 months, 1 in 3 people in Europe would be dead. Not 1 in 100, not 1 in 50, 1 in 3. In some cities, Avignon, Florence, certain coastal towns, it was closer to 1 in 2. The Black Death killed between 75 and 200 million people across Eurasia in 4 years. And it started with dead rats that nobody thought to question. Welcome back to Unseen Dark Time, where we go to the parts of history that the textbooks summarize in 2 paragraphs, and we stay there until you understand what it actually felt like to live through it. This video is built using AI reconstruction. If any visual detail seems slightly off, set it aside. What matters is the history underneath it. By the end of this video, you will understand why the people who survived the Black Death were not the strongest or the healthiest. They were the ones who did the one thing that every authority in 1348, every physician, every priest, every city official told them not to do. And there is one more thing. The most dangerous person in any village in 1348 was not the sick person lying in the corner. It was the person standing over them trying to help. That story is coming. First, the ship. October 1347. The port of Messina, Sicily. 12 Genoese trading ships arrive from the Black Sea. The harbor officials who go out to meet them find something wrong before the ships have fully docked. The sailors on board are either dead or dying. Those still alive are covered in black swellings, in the armpits, in the groin, on the neck, the size of an egg or an apple, oozing blood and pus. Their skin is covered in black blotches. They are delirious with fever. The harbor officials of Messina make the only reasonable decision available to them. They order the ships out of the harbor immediately. Every ship, back to sea. The ships leave, but the disease does not leave with them. It was already ashore. The rats that had traveled with those ships, inside the cargo, in the ropes, in the dark spaces of the hull, had been coming ashore for days before the sailors showed symptoms. And the fleas on those rats had been feeding on the sailors for weeks at sea. The fleas were already in the warehouses, already in the grain stores, already on the local rats. The harbor officials of Messina did everything right. They were already too late. This is the first lesson of the Black Death. By the time you can see the disease, it has already moved further than you can contain. The bubo appears between 2 and 6 days after infection. Before we go further, you need to understand what a bubo actually is. Not the sanitized version, the real one. It is a swollen lymph node, the body's immune system trying to contain an infection it cannot contain. The lymph nodes nearest to the infection site swell first, in the groin, under the arm, on the neck. They swell from their normal small size to the size of an egg, then larger. Some reach the size of an orange. The skin over them turns dark, then black. The tissue inside begins to die while the patient is still alive. The smell, contemporary accounts describe it in terms that suggest it was detectable before you entered the room, is the smell of tissue decomposing while attached to a living body. The patient is alive. The bubo is not. Fever accompanies it. Not the kind of fever that makes you stay in bed. The kind that makes you delirious, that breaks your sense of time, that makes you unable to accurately report your own symptoms to the physician standing beside you. Vomiting, inability to keep water down, the skin blotches, black spreading, that gave the disease the name it carries to this day. Death, when it came in 2 to 7 days. But here is what nobody in 1348 understood about those days. The dying patient in the corner was not the primary source of infection in the room. The fleas on the dying patient were, and the fleas had no loyalty to their host. The moment the host's body temperature dropped, at death, or sometimes before, the fleas moved to the next warm body in the room, to the physician kneeling beside the bed, to the priest who came to deliver last rites, to the family who stayed because leaving felt like abandonment. Every act of care was a transfer. Drop a comment right now. If you had been a physician in 1348, knowing nothing about fleas or bacteria, knowing only that your patients were dying, what would you have done? Tell us. And tell us where in the world you are watching from tonight. Every location surprises us. The physician arrived. This is where the story gets genuinely difficult to tell without anger. Medieval medicine operated on a theory that had been accepted for over 1,000 years. The human body contained 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Disease was an imbalance. Treatment was correction. For a patient with Black Death, fever, swollen lymph nodes, black skin, the diagnosis was clear. An excess of corrupt blood, possibly combined with corrupted air, had poisoned the system. The treatment was equally clear: remove the corrupt blood. Lance the buboes to drain the corruption. The physician opened the patient's arm with a lancet and removed blood. Then he took a blade to the bubo, that swollen, infected, pressurized mass of dying tissue, and opened it. The contents of the bubo, when lanced, were directly infectious. The physician's hands were in them. His face was close. The material that sprayed when the pressure was released went directly into the environment. Then the physician moved to the next patient. Think about what was happening. The treatment created direct contact between the physician's blood and the most infectious material the disease produced. It aerosolized the bacteria in an enclosed space. It spread the contents of the bubo to every surface the physician subsequently touched. The cure was the fastest delivery mechanism for the disease. Physicians died at extraordinary rates during the Black Death, not because they were unlucky, because their training guaranteed exposure at the most dangerous possible moment in the most dangerous possible way. The most educated, most skilled, most experienced medical professionals in Europe were being killed by their own competence. This is not a story about ignorance. It is a story about what happens when an entire civilization's understanding of how the body works is completely wrong. And the people most committed to that understanding are the ones most certain they are helping. The church had an explanation. The explanation made everything worse. God was angry. This was the theological consensus, reached quickly, confidently, and with complete institutional authority across most of Christian Europe in 1347 and 1348. The plague was divine punishment for human sin. The correct response was not quarantine. It was prayer, penance, and public religious observance, which meant processions. Large groups of people walking through cities together, praying together, gathering in churches together. The flagellants, groups of men who traveled from town to town, whipping themselves publicly to demonstrate repentance, drew crowds everywhere they went. Every one of those crowds was a transmission event. The church was not evil. The church was doing exactly what its theology told it to do in the face of unexplained mass death. The problem was that its theology had no mechanism for understanding that gathering people together was gathering the disease together. Prayer did not stop fleas. Public penance did not stop fleas. The only thing that stopped fleas was distance. And distance was precisely what religious observance required people not to maintain. The cities that survived the Black Death best were not the most devout. They were the ones that, by accident, or by the independent judgment of a few individuals who ignored official advice, implemented something like isolation. Ragusa, on the Adriatic coast, instituted what may be the first formal quarantine in history. Ships were required to anchor offshore for 30 days before anyone came ashore. 30 days. Not because anyone understood the incubation period of Yersinia pestis, because 30 was a holy number. The quarantine worked for reasons its inventors did not understand. Giovanni di Musi was an Italian notary, not a physician, not a priest, a man whose job was to write things down accurately and keep records. He was in Kaffa, a Genoese trading port on the Black Sea coast of Crimea, when the disease arrived there in 1346. Carried by the Mongol army besieging the city, he survived. He eventually made his way back to Italy, and he wrote down everything he had seen in a document that is one of the most important primary sources for the early history of the Black Death. His account describes the Mongol army catapulting its own infected dead over the walls of Kaffa, possibly the first recorded use of biological warfare in history. It describes the Genoese merchants inside the walls falling sick despite the siege. It describes the ships that left Kaffa carrying sick sailors who then spread the disease to every port they touched on the way home. He also describes something more personal. He describes watching people die who had no explanation for what was happening to them, who had no framework, medical, religious, or otherwise, that made sense of what they were experiencing, who died confused as well as sick. This is the detail that history books skip over. The Black Death did not just kill people, it killed them without explanation. In a century when the church provided the explanatory framework for everything that happened in human life, the plague arrived and provided no framework at all. God's punishment made theological sense, but it did not explain why the most devout died alongside the sinful, why priests died faster than their congregations, why children died before their parents, why entire monasteries were wiped out while nearby villages survived. The disease did not discriminate in ways that the available theology could account for. And that absence of explanation, the gap between what was happening and any coherent reason for it, may have been as devastating to medieval society as the death toll itself. By the spring of 1348, the disease had reached France. By summer, England. By the end of 1349, it had moved through most of Europe. The bodies accumulated faster than burial was possible. This is not a metaphor. In Avignon, the Pope consecrated the Rhône River so that bodies could be thrown into it because there was no more room in the consecrated ground. In London, mass graves were opened, large pits into which bodies were placed in layers, separated by thin coverings of earth, the layers continuing until the pit was full. Contemporary accounts describe the smell as detectable from considerable distance. They describe the pits as filling within days. The people who dug the pits died. The priests who administered last rites died. The physicians who lanced the buboes died. The family members who stayed to care for the dying died. The people who survived at the highest rates were the ones who left, not the ones who prayed harder, not the ones who flagellated themselves more devotedly, the ones who, when the disease appeared in their village, took their family and walked into the countryside and stayed there. Distance. That was the answer. An answer that required ignoring every authority, medical, religious, civic, that existed in 1348. An answer that looked from the outside like cowardice or faithlessness. An answer that saved lives for reasons that nobody who acted on it could have articulated in terms their century would have accepted. The Black Death killed between 30 and 60% of Europe's population. The range is wide because the records are incomplete. The people who would have kept the records were dying. It did not stop in 1349. It came back. In 1361, in 1369, in 1374, recurring waves, smaller than the first but still devastating, for the next 3 centuries. The last major outbreak in Western Europe was the Great Plague of London in 1665, 300 years after the first ships arrived in Messina. 300 years of recurrence. 300 years during which Europe rebuilt its population only to lose portions of it again. 300 years during which the explanatory frameworks, medical and religious, that had failed so catastrophically in 1348 were slowly, unevenly, and at enormous cost replaced by something closer to the truth. The physician who lanced the buboes was not stupid. He was working with everything he had been given. The priest who organized the procession was not evil. He was doing what his institution told him God required. The city official who failed to implement quarantine was not negligent. He was following the advice of the most educated people available to him. They were all wrong, in ways that killed people, in ways that no one in 1348 had the tools to identify. Here is what the Black Death actually teaches, and it is not what most history books say it teaches. It does not teach that medieval people were primitive or superstitious. It teaches that intelligent people, operating with incomplete information, inside institutional frameworks that pointed them in the wrong direction, can cause enormous harm while genuinely trying to help. The physician with his lancet, the priest with his procession, the flagellant with his whip, none of them were performing cruelty. They were performing care, the most effective care they knew how to perform, inside the most complete understanding of the world they had access to. And the disease moved through them all. The people who survived at the highest rates were the ones who broke from the frameworks, who ignored the physician and the priest and the city official and simply left, who trusted the evidence of their own eyes. That proximity to the sick meant death, over the explanatory systems that told them proximity to the sick was what God and medicine required. Distance saved them. Not knowledge, not prayer, not treatment. Distance. Giovanni di Mussi wrote it all down. He survived. He watched the ships leave Kaffa. He watched the disease follow them. He wrote it down in a document that sat in an archive for centuries, read by scholars, referenced in footnotes, and never fully absorbed by the civilization it described. The rats were already dead when the ships arrived in Messina. The disease was already ashore before the harbor officials acted. The physicians were already carrying it on their hands before anyone understood what their hands were carrying. In 1348, the first 24 hours were already the last 24 hours for more people than anyone had the capacity to count. The next video in this series goes somewhere you might not expect. Not another plague, not another battle. We are going into the room where the Black Death changed something that has never fully changed back. The relationship between ordinary people and the institutions that were supposed to protect them. What broke in 1348 is still broken. And the specific moment it broke is more recent than you think. Which city or period of history do you want us to go to next? Drop it in the comments below, and tell us where in the world you are watching from tonight. If this made 1348 feel less like a date on a timeline, share it and subscribe. That next video is already waiting.